It's ready, a soft voice rang out in the dark. I'll tell you when it's ready, said the man on the corner, studying a monitor intently. Raise it a few more degrees, he whispered. I said before that might be too much, she said from the opposite corner, leaning over the table. The light shimmered off her contours as she carefully examined what lay before her. Do it, the salt man said. The woman touched a dial, then recoiled suddenly. What is it? He demanded. He didn't take his eyes off the monitor. Raise it 2 more degrees, he ordered, his voice raising. For a moment, the room was silent. Finally, the man turned toward the table. Is there a problem? I think it's. The woman trailed off. What? Moving, she finished. Of course it is. Of course. They are. It looks like it's in pain, she whispered. The man smiled. Yes. A bright light flashed and abruptly as a sudden noise resounded from the center of the room. Red, green, and blue lights flashed in sequence, and a cheerful voice erupted from the speakers embedded in the walls, filling the room with song. Every light shone down on him, the sleek white and purple bear. His joints clicked with every pivot. His eyes jolted back and forth randomly. He stood about 6 feet high, his rosy cheeks like two balls of bright cotton candy, and he wielded a microphone with a head like a shimmering disco ball. Shut that thing off, the slouched man shouted, getting to his feet and with obvious difficulty. He moved slowly toward the center of the room, leaning heavily on his cane. Get back, I'll do it myself, he screamed as the woman retreated to the table in the corner. The man pried a white plastic plate off the chest of the singing bear and reached inside the cavity, extending his arm all the way into the opening and pulling at whatever he could find. As he disconnected the wires inside, first the eyes stopped turning, then the eyelids stopped clamping shut, then the mouth stopped singing, and the head stopped turning. Finally, with one last jostle, the eyelids clamped shut and the head dropped to the side lifeless. The man stepped back and the heavy plate of the bear's chest cavity swung shut with a clang as the animatronic bear, filled with the sounds of servos and wheels, broken and disconnected, unable to move or function. Spurts of air burst from between the seams of his body, casting as the hair hisses misfired. The sound came to a stop, the echoes from it lingering for a moment before dying away. The man turned his attention back to the table and lurched to it. He looked down, studying the writhing figure that lay there for a moment. The table surface was glowing orange, and the hot metal hissed. He took a syringe from the woman's hand and thrust it into the screaming thing forcefully. He drew the plunger up, holding the needle steady as the syringe filled with molten substance. Then finally pulled away with a jolt. He staggered back toward the bear. Now, let us put you to greater purpose, he said to the glowing syringe. The man again pried open the heavy chest plate of the standing broken bear, then carefully inserted the syringe. He held directly into the chest cavity and began to press the plunger down. The cavity snapped shut, too heavy for the frail man to hold open, and he fell backward, clutching his arm, the syringe clattering to the ground. Still nearly full, the woman rushed to kneel by his side, feeling his arm for brakes. I'm fine, he grumbled and glanced up at the still motionless bear. It needs to be heated more. The hissing sound continued as the figure turned on the table, pushing off plumes of steam as it rolled onto the hot surface. We can't heat it more, the woman said. You'll destroy them. The man looked up at her with a warm smile, then jerked his eyes back to the bear. He was now looking down at them, his eyes open wide and tracking their subless movement. Their lives will now have a greater purpose, the man said contentedly. They will become more, just like you did. He looked up at the woman kneeling over him, and she looked back, her glossy, painted cheeks gleaming in the light. John let himself into his apartment and locked the deadlock behind him, sliding the chain into place for the first time since he moved in. He went to the window and fiddled with the blinds, then stopped, pushing back the impulse to close them and seal himself away completely from the outside world. On the other side of the glass, the parking lot was still and silent, casting the eerie light of a single street lamp and the blue neon sign of a nearby car dealership. There was an unfamiliar whirring sound coming from somewhere, and John watched the parking lot for a moment, not sure what he was expecting to see. The sun was gone soon after anyway, and he went into the bathroom to splash water on his face. When he came back into his bedroom, he froze. It was the sound again, this time louder. It was in the room with him. John held his breath, straining to listen. It was a quiet noise, the sound of something moving, but it was too regular, too mechanical to be a mouse. He flipped on the light. The noise continued, and he slowly turned, trying to hear where it was coming from, and found himself looking at Theodore. "Is that you?" he asked. He stepped closer and picked up the disembodied robot's head. He held it to his ear, listening to the strange sound emanating from inside the stuffed creature. There was a sudden click, and the sound stopped. John waited, but the toy was silent. He put Theodore back down on the dresser and waited for a moment to see if the sound would begin again. "I'm not crazy," John said to the rabbit. "I won't let you or anyone else convince me that I am." He went to his bed, reaching under the mattress with a suspicious glance at the toy rabbit. Suddenly feeling watched, he took out the notebook he had hidden there and sat back on the bed. Looking at its black and white cover, it was a plain composition notebook, the kind with a little place in front for your name and class subject. John had left it blank, and now he traced the empty lines with his finger, not really wanting to open the book that had sat untouched beneath his mattress for nearly 3 months now. At last, he sighed and opened to the first page. "I'm not crazy," he spoke to the rabbit again. "I know what I saw. Charlie." He filled the first page with nothing but facts and statistics, of which he knew embarrassingly few. He realized he'd known Charlie's father, but not her mother. Her brother was still a mystery. He didn't even know if she'd been born in New Harmony or if there was some another town before Fredbear's. The diner they had discovered that first time they all returned to Freddy's. He had painstakingly written out their shared history, childhood, and hurricane. Then the tragedy at Freddy's. Then her father's suicide. She had moved on with her Aunt Jen after that. As he wrote that down, John realized that he had never known where Charlie and Jen lived. Close enough to a hurricane that she had driven rather than flown there for the dedication of Michael's Memorial Scholarship nearly 2 years ago. But it seemed odd that she had never even mentioned the name of the town where she now and then lived. He flipped through the pages. They grew less and less sparse as he had continued, the details filling in more and more as he called them over and over to mind. He had scribbled whole scenes of memory, like the time he put gum in her hair, thinking it would be funny. Charlie had stared at him with an impish look on her face as the first-rate teacher cut out her hair with little blue-handled safety scissors. Charlie had managed to retrieve the clump of hairy gum from the trash when no one was looking and took it outside with her during recess. As soon as they were out of the door, Charlie grinned at John. "I want to give you your gum back," she said, and the afternoon became a game of chase as they careened around the schoolyard. Charlie, determined to shove the hair and crushed a piece of chewing gum back into John's mouth. She had not succeeded. They were caught and both given time out. John smiled as he read the scribbled version of the story. It had seemed important to start with their childhood, to ground himself into the Charlie that was and the John that was as well. Now he sighed and flipped ahead. In the later pages, he had tried to capture everything about her, the way she moved, the way she spoke. It was hard. The more time passed, the more memories would be John's memory of Charlie and not Charlie. And so he had written down as much as he could, as fast as he could, starting 3 days after that night. There was the way she walked, self assured until she realized someone was looking at her. There was the non sequiturs she tended to toss out every time she got nervous around people, which was often. There was the way she sometimes seemed to sink into herself, as if there was another reality going on inside her head, and she had stepped momentarily outside this one and into somewhere he could never follow. He sighed. How do you check for that? He flipped the notebook over. He had started a different set of thoughts from the back. What happened to Charlie? If the woman at Carlton's party, the woman who had appeared so suddenly at the diner, was not Charlie, then who was she? The most obvious answer, of course, would be her twin. Charlie had always referred to a boy, but Sammy could be short for Samantha, and the memory Charlie had confided in him of Sammy being taken from the closet was a kidnapping, not a murder. What if Charlie's twin was still alive? What if she had been not only kidnapped by Springtrap, William Afton at the time, but raised by him? What if what if she had been shaped and molded into a psychopath for 17 years, primed with all the knowledge Springtrap had gleaned from Charlie's life, and now she had been sent to take Charlie's place? But why? What was the point of that? Afton's fixation on Charlie was disturbing, but he didn't seem capable of anything so elaborate, or of caring for a human child long enough to brainwash her. He had written out a dozen other possible theories, but when he read them over now, none really felt right. They either fell apart among scrutiny or, like the imagined Samantha, they made no real sense. In all cases, he could not match them to Charlie he had met earlier that night. Her sorrow and her bemusement had been something so real. Picturing her face now raised a dull ache in his chest. John closed the book, trying to imagine for a moment the situation reversed. Charlie, his Charlie, trying for him, insisting that he was not himself, that he, the real John, was dead. I fall apart. He would feel the way Charlie had looked tonight, pleading, hugging herself, as if it was all she could do to hold herself in one piece. He lay back on the bed, holding the book onto his chest, where it sat, heavier than its weight. He closed his eyes, clutching the book like a child's toy, and as he drifted to sleep, he heard the sound from Theodore's head again, the whirring, and then the click. The next day, John woke up late and filled with a rootless dread. He glanced at the clock, realized in a panic that he was late for work, and almost simultaneously recalled that there was no more work, a reality that would have consequences soon enough, but not today. All he had to do today was meet Charlie. The dread swelled again at the thought of it, and he sighed. Late that afternoon, he dug his, as he dug through his dresser for a presidential shirt, someone knocked at the door. John glanced at Theodore. Who? John whispered. The rabbit didn't answer. John went to the door. Through the front door, he saw Clay Burke standing outside, staring at the door, apparently politely ignoring the fact that he could see right into John's apartment if he wanted to. John sighed and slid the chain off the latch, then opened the door wide. Clay, hey, come in. Clay hesitated into the threshold, glancing at the interior that was too sparse to be a mess. John shrugged. Before he judged, remember that I've seen your plays look worse than this, he said, and Clay smiled. Yes, you have, he said at last, and came inside. The noise from Peter's head stirred again, but John chose to ignore it. What was that? Clay asked after a few seconds. John waited to answer, knowing the sound would stop soon, and after a moment it did, with the same click as before. It's the rabbit head. John smiled. Right, of course. Clay looked toward the dresser, then back at John as though, excuse me, nothing was out of the ordinary. Considering what they've been through in the past, it really wasn't. So, what can I do for you? John asked before something stranger could happen. Clay rocked on his heels momentarily. I wanted to see how you were doing, he said lightly. Really? Didn't we have to didn't we have that talk yesterday? John said drearily. He stood again and grabbed a clean shirt from his dresser and went into the bathroom to change. Yeah, well, you can never be too sure, Clay said, raising his voice to be heard. John turned on the faucet. John, what do you know about Charlie's Aunt Jen? John turned the faucet off abruptly, jarred out of his petulant mood. Clay, what did you say? I said, what do you know about Charlie's aunt? John changed his shirt quickly and came back into the bedroom. Aunt Jen? I never met her. Clay gave him a sharp look. You never saw her? I didn't say that, John said. Why are you asking me this now? Clay hesitated. Shirley became very eager to see you again when I mentioned that you had seen Jen that night, he said, seeming to choose the words with care. Why would Shirley care if I saw Aunt Jen or not? For that matter, why do you? John reached past Clay to grab a belt hanging off the foot of the bed and began to slip it through the loop of his jeans. It just made me realize that there is a lot we don't know about that night, Clay said. I think your conversation with the Charlie tonight can help you fill in those gaps if you ask the right questions. You want me to interrogate her? John laughed without humor. Clay sighed, frustration leaking through his inhabitable calm. That's not what I'm asking, John. All I'm saying is, if Charlie's aunt was there that night, then I'd like to ask her a question or two. John stared at Clay, who just looked back at him placidly, waiting. John grabbed a pair of socks and sat down on the bed. Why are you suddenly coming to me anyway? He asked. No one's believed anything I've said so far. It's what we found at the compound, Clay answered, more easily than John had expected. He straightened. The compound? You mean Charlie's dad's house? Clay gave him a level look. I think we both know it was more than just a house, he said. John shrugged and said nothing. Wait for him to go on. Some of the things we found in the wreckage they didn't mean much to anyone else, but some of the things I saw down there were pretty scary, even though most of it was buried under concrete and metal. Scary? What was the conclusion of your entire team or just you? John said, not bothering to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. Clay didn't seem to hear him, his eyes fixed on a point between them. Clay, John said, alarmed. What did you find? What do you mean scary? Clay blinked. I wouldn't be sure how else to describe it, he said. John shook his head. I will say this, Clay said harshly. I'm not ready to close the book on the Dave William Afton, whatever he was calling himself. Springtrap, John said quietly. I'm not ready to close the book on that case, Clay finished. What does that mean? You think he's still alive? I just think we can't make any assumptions, Clay said. John shrugged again. He was out of patience, out of interest, almost. He was sick of intrigue. Clay withholding information, trying to protect them, as if keeping secrets had kept any of them safe ever.